The Canvas of Awareness, How Schrödinger Saw Consciousness as the Ground of Reality. The world is given to me only once. Why a great physicist spent so much time thinking about mind. Erwin Schrödinger, 1887 to 1961, is best known to the public for a cat that is both alive and dead, and to physicists for a differential equation that reorganized atomic theory. But running through his life's work is a philosophical conviction about awareness that he formulated again and again. The world we know is a construct of mind. Subject and object are not two fundamentally separate things, and consciousness is not one item among others inside the world. It is the very condition under which a world appears at all. In the epilogue to his most widely read book, he put the point starkly. Consciousness is a singular of which the plural is unknown, and the everyday impression of many minds is a surface appearance that arises because there are many similar bodies. The arc of Schrödinger's biography helps explain why these ideas mattered to him. Born in Vienna on August 12, 1887, he studied at the University of Vienna, 1906 to 1910, and served as an artillery officer in World War I. After early posts in Stuttgart and Breslau, he moved to Zurich, 1921 to 1927, where in an intense 6-month burst in 1926, he published the papers that introduced wave mechanics and the equation that now bears his name. In 1933, he shared the Nobel Prize in Physics with Paul Dirac. He then left Berlin, where he had succeeded Max Planck, after Hitler's rise, passed through England and Graz, and finally, after the 1938 Anschluss forced him out of Austria, settled in Dublin, 1940 to 1955, at the newly founded Institute for Advanced Studies. He retired to Vienna in 1956 and died there on January 4, 1961. Those waypoints matter because Schrödinger's philosophical writings cluster around two periods: the 1940s in Dublin, when he delivered the lectures, later published as What is Life, and began writing more explicitly on mind, and the 1950s, when Mind and Matter and My View of the World appeared. It is across those texts that his view of consciousness, as singular and not reducible to brain stuff, is developed and refined. The scientist who distrusted objectivation. Schrödinger's physics is often remembered as a bid to restore continuity to the quantum world. Even in his Nobel biographical sketch, he's described as disliking the dual description in terms of waves and particles and trying to set up a theory in terms of waves only. That physics-level predilection, preferring one seamless reality over a patchwork of ontologies, echoes in his philosophy. In Mind and Matter, he criticizes what he calls the principle of objectivation, the methodological habit, indispensable in science, of bracketing the subject of experience, the I, to treat the world as a purely objective tableau. The price of that success, he argued, is that the subject disappears from the scientific picture. In a much-quoted line, he writes, "The reason why our sentient, percipient and thinking ego is met nowhere within our scientific world, picture can easily be indicated in 7 words, because it is itself that world picture," emphasis added. This is not romantic anti-science. Schrödinger's point is methodological and phenomenological. Science yields a world picture of objects and relations, but the very capacity to have a picture belongs to consciousness. Trying to locate that capacity inside the picture, as one object among others, is, he says, a category mistake. In another line, he adds that every man's world picture is and always remains a construct of his mind and cannot be proved to have any other existence. From that vantage, the popular thesis that the brain produces consciousness looks backward. Brains are discovered, modeled, and correlated with experience within the world picture. But the perceiving self that frames the picture is not one of the picture's items. On Schrödinger's account, neural processes correlate with experiences, help explain why experience has the texture it does, and even set limits on it. Consider the effects of fever, narcosis, or brain injury. But they do not conjure the very fact of awareness out of insensate matter. He puts it this way when explaining why plurality of minds seems plausible yet is suspect. Consciousness finds itself intimately connected with and dependent on the physical state of a limited region of matter, the body. Now, there is a great plurality of similar bodies. Hence, the pluralization of consciousnesses, or minds, seems a very suggestive hypothesis. But, he continues, that path leads to needless metaphysical complications. The sound alternative is to keep to the immediate experience that consciousness is a singular of which the plural is unknown. Third interlude. Two dramatized conversations. The exchanges below are dramatizations for clarity. They are not verbatim transcripts. Dublin, 1943, Schrödinger and Éamon de Valera, mathematician and Taoiseach, after a lecture. De Valera. Your talk on life suggests physics might be missing other laws. Bold stuff. Schrödinger. Only that the genetic code stability hints we may need other laws of physics hitherto unknown, which, once found, will belong to physics just as integrally as those we already have. De Valera. And your mind lectures. Schrödinger. There I argue a different point. The subject is not in the world the physicist studies. It is the ground of the study itself. That's no license for superstition. Only clarity about categories. Vienna, 1950s, with a skeptical neuroscientist. Neuroscientist. Surely we will one day find consciousness in the brain. Schrödinger. We will find millions of cells arranged in intricate ways, but nowhere will you ever meet the personality. For the ego is identical with the world picture itself. That is why it can't be contained within it, as a part of it. Neuroscientist. Then why do we feel separate? Schrödinger. Because there are many similar bodies, and consciousness is bound as a practical matter to one at a time. But that practical plurality should not be reified into metaphysical scatter. The fourth, the cat, the equation, and the one mind. Schrödingers 1935 paper, Die gegenwärtige Situation in der Quantenmechanik, coined Verschränkung, entanglement, and features the famous cat, a reductio of simplistic readings of quantum superposition applied to the macro world. The point was not that consciousness collapses wave functions, but that the then standard interpretive talk poorly connected formalism to experience. He devised the example to show how bizarre the consequences become if one carries the formal superposition naively into the macroscopic realm. But the thought experiment sits within a deeper view. Schrödinger rejected the idea that mind is a ghost added to the machine. And he did not like the idea that physics must be supplemented by a special collapse by consciousness. The Nobel Foundation's biography notes that he disliked the generally accepted dual description and sought a wave-only account, reflecting his broader suspicion of dualisms. In his writings on consciousness, he returns to a theme he sometimes called the arithmetic paradox. How is it that many subjects, or so we think, inhabit one world? The typical Western solution multiplies souls to match bodies. Schrödinger demurs, there is obviously only one alternative, namely the unification of minds. Their multiplicity is only apparent. In truth, there is only one mind. This is the doctrine of the Upanishads. He then offers an empirical buttress for this doctrine of identity. Consciousness is never experienced in the plural, only in the singular. Notice the restraint. He does not build a physics out of mysticism. He notes an experiential datum, and argues that multiplying minds is an inference not supported by direct experience. The plural minds hypothesis is suggestive, he concedes, because consciousness is functionally and developmentally tied to a body, but the pluralization is philosophically gratuitous. V. Vedanta, Schopenhauer, Huxley. Why Schrödinger reached to Indian sources. Schrödinger was steeped in European philosophy, Kant, Spinoza, and especially Schopenhauer, whose opener, "The world is my representation," he echoes in Mind and Matter. Schopenhauer was also his bridge to Indian thought. Britannica's biographical profile notes that Schrödinger's final philosophical outlook closely paralleled the mysticism of the Vedanta, and in his own prose, he explicitly invokes the Upanishadic identity Atman equals Brahman. The personal self equals the omnipresent, all-comprehending eternal self, calling this the quintessence of the deepest insight into the happenings of the world. Why Vedanta? Because it articulates exactly the non-dualist conclusion he reaches from his analysis of experience. One consciousness appearing as many through Maya, deception, or illusion. The same illusion, as in a gallery of mirrors, he writes. He also salutes Aldous Huxley's The Perennial Philosophy, a cross-cultural anthology of mystical insights, as a beautiful book that explains both the monistic state of affairs and why it is difficult to grasp. Modern scholars, including Michel Bitbol and Bruno Bertotti, one of Schrödinger's students, have described Schrödinger's stance as rational mysticism, a non-dualist metaphysics anchored in phenomenological clarity and sympathetic to Indian sources, without abandoning the logical exactness he prized in physics. In Bertotti's summary, all existence, in particular the individual consciousnesses, are manifestations of a single mind. A telling private remark, reported in a letter to Bruno Bertotti, captures the character of his appeal to Vedanta's formula tat tivam asi, that art thou. Schrödinger says it is not a physical, but rather a metaphysical statement, so simple that it is impossible to explain it, and adds that it may spring up in you at some occasion like a spark. The point is not to replace physics with mysticism, but to keep categories straight. Physics models the order of appearances. Vedanta expresses, in a minimal metaphysical idiom, what experience already intimates about subject and object. Sixth, the Dublin Lectures, Life, Entropy, and the Mind that Knows Them. In What is Life? 1944. Based on his 1943 Dublin Lectures, Schrödinger focused on the physical stability of the gene and the question of how living matter maintains order from order rather than dissolving into disorder under the second law. He famously suggested that biology might lead to other laws of physics hitherto unknown, an intuition that, while not a literal anticipation of DNA's double helix, did spur generations of biologists to search for the molecular code script of life. At the end of that same book, the epilogue that turns to Mind and Matter, he faces what he calls the biologist's embarrassment. We live as if our bodies run according to natural law, and we direct those bodies and bear responsibility for what they do. His resolution is striking. The only possible inference is, I think, that I in the widest meaning of the word, that is to say, every conscious mind that has ever said or felt, I am the person, if any, who controls the motion of the atoms according to the laws of nature. He immediately adds that this insight is old, Atman equals Brahman in the Upanishads, and that consciousness is never experienced in the plural. This is often misread as a cosmic inflation of the ego. Hence I am God Almighty, he writes, acknowledging how the phrasing will scandalize some. But the point is the opposite. The I here is not the autobiographical bundle of memories and traits. It is the canvas upon which they are collected. Erase the memories, he says, and you do not eliminate existence as a subject. Notice too a careful scientific aside. Quantum indeterminacy plays no biologically relevant role in the mind's ordinary activity. He is not building a physics of free will on quantum dice. He is articulating the category within which talk of bodies and laws makes sense at all. Seventh, subject and object are only one, the core thesis. In one condensed passage, Schrödinger writes, "The world is given to me only once, not one existing and one perceived. Subject and object are only one. The barrier between them cannot be said to have broken down as a result of recent experience in the physical sciences, for this barrier does not exist." This is not a suggestion that physical and mental are numerically the same kind of stuff. Rather, it is the claim that the split between appearance and reality, or between observer and observed as separate ontological orders, is a useful fiction created by the method of objectivation. In our practical lives, we retain the distinction. There are good reasons to keep using it for practical reference. But in philosophy, he says, we should abandon it. From this vantage, one can see why Schrödinger thought consciousness is not merely a product of the brain. Brains are exquisitely relevant to how awareness appears, but to treat awareness itself as a secretion of neural tissue makes the world picture swallow its own precondition. His most succinct formulation is, again, the perceiving self is nowhere to be found in the world picture because it is that picture. That is why, he argues, you will never meet the personality by inspecting neural tissue, no matter how far physiology advances. Eighth, a life threaded with philosophy. Schrödinger's biographical itinerary and his metaphysical thread constantly cross. Vienna, 1887 to 1910. He is trained by Franz Exner and influenced by the empiricist atmosphere shaped by Mach and Boltzmann. War and early posts, service as an artillery officer, then positions at Stuttgart and Breslau. Zurich, 1921 to 1927. His most fruitful period, culminating in wave mechanics, 1926. The episode of devising a wave picture rather than a discrete quantum jump ontology mirrors his later refusal of sharp ontological splits. Berlin, 1927 to 1933. Successor to Planck, leaves in protest after Hitler's rise. UK, Princeton, Graz, Ghent, 1933 to 1940. A restless interlude, culminating in invitation to Dublin by Eamon de Valera, himself a mathematician. Dublin, 1940 to 1955. Founding director of the School for Theoretical Physics at the Institute for Advanced Studies. Here he delivers What is Life, and writes essays on mind, time, free will, and the nature of scientific explanation. Vienna, 1956 to 1961. Returns as Professor Emeritus, publishes My View of the World, a compact synthesis of his one-mind outlook and his critique of objectivation. He dies in Vienna at 73. Throughout, he published accessible philosophical works, Nature and the Greeks, Science and Humanism, Mind and Matter, that aim to resituate science within a humane picture of knowledge. These are not glittering afterthoughts to his physics. They are a continuous attempt to understand what kind of thing scientific knowledge is, and how the subject that knows is related to the world that is known. Ninth dialogue across traditions, dramatized. A seminar room, late 1950s. A student asks whether Vedanta isn't unscientific. Student: isn't talking about Atman equals Brahman importing theology into physics? Schrödinger: into physics, no. Physics requires the method of objectivation. But the question what consciousness is not settled by method. The Upanishadic identity is the quintessence, of a recognition about experience, that the subject-object gap is not ultimate. It is not a physical, but a metaphysical statement, so simple that it is impossible to explain it, one that may dawn like a spark. Student: then your one mind is philosophy, not science. Schrödinger: it is what you discover when you press your empiricism beyond objects to the condition under which any object is present. Call it philosophy if you must, just don't confuse it with bad physics. X: what Schrödinger's view is not clearing common confusions. Not consciousness collapses the wave function. Some of Schrödinger's contemporaries explored subjectivist lines, e.g., Pascual Jordan's talk of "we ourselves produce the results of measurement." Schrödinger, by contrast, remained drawn to a wave-only picture and did not tie the formal collapse to a Cartesian mind. The cat was a reductio, not an argument for mind causes collapse, not a naive spiritualism. The core of his position is a phenomenological minimalism. We never experience consciousness in the plural, and the perceiving self cannot be in the picture it frames. That leads him to a metaphysics of non-duality, consonant with Vedanta. But he is careful to keep the hard-won logical precision of science. He even warns against importing quantum indeterminacy into biology as a magic key to mind. Not a dismissal of the brain. Brains matter for how awareness shows up. Think of the effects of fever, intoxication, narcosis, lesion of the brain. Yet he denies that consciousness can be found as an object in the head, for the simple reason that objects are items in the world picture that consciousness furnishes. 11. The signature claims, in his own words, with context. Singularity of awareness. Consciousness is never experienced in the plural, only in the singular. There is no trace of circumstantial evidence of this ever happening anywhere in the world. What is life? Epilogue. Upanishadic resonance. From the early great Upanishads, the recognition Atman equals Brahman is the quintessence of deepest insight into the happenings of the world. What is life? Epilogue. No subject-object gap. The world is given to me only once, not one existing and one perceived. Subject and object are only one. The barrier does not exist. Mind and matter. Why you won't find the self in the brain. The reason why our sentient, percipient and thinking ego is met nowhere within our scientific world picture, because it is itself that world picture. Mind and matter. Biology may need new physics, but mind is not quantum magic. Life is likely to involve other laws of physics hitherto unknown, though quantum indeterminacy plays no biologically relevant role in ordinary mental activity. What is life? Each line gains weight from the others. The singularity claim rests on experience. The Upanishadic appeal shows the articulation of that experience in a venerable tradition. The subject-object line dissolves a metaphysical scaffolding that would make the self one more thing in the world. The world picture remark locates the category mistake in reductionist projects, and the biology line keeps his metaphysics from floating free of science. 12th. Biography revisited. How the life and the view cohere. Schrödinger's international movement, Vienna to Zurich to Berlin, to Oxford, Princeton, to Graz, Ghent to Dublin, coincides with a widening of his intellectual audience. In Dublin, under de Valera's patronage, he could write for laypeople and specialists both. It was there that What is Life introduced physicists and biologists to a new way of thinking about order, information, and heredity, and where his epilogue ventured a view of mind that he would elaborate in Mind and Matter and eventually compress in My View of the World. His personal life, unconventional and often itinerant, mapped onto a conviction that scientific specialism should not drown out the broader human questions. That is the animating aim of nature and the Greeks, and science and humanism, where he cautions that science by itself does not deliver ethics, aesthetics, or meaning. It delivers a stunningly powerful model. Philosophy must say what kind of thing that model is. 13th. A final dramatized scene after a public lecture. Questioner: if there is only one mind, why do I feel like me and not you? Schrödinger: because consciousness finds itself intimately connected with the physical state of a limited region of matter, the body. There are many such similar bodies. The plurality of bodies is real enough, but the plurality of consciousnesses is a deceptive projection from that fact. The I that feels like me is the canvas, not the images painted upon it. Questioner: and when I die? Schrödinger: if a skilled hypnotist succeeded in blotting out entirely all your earlier reminiscences, you would not find that he had killed you. In no case is there a loss of personal existence to deplore. The autobiographical story ends. The subject of experience is not an object that can end. 14th. Positioning Schrödinger among philosophies of mind. Against reductive materialism. He denies that consciousness supervenes on brain processes in a way that makes consciousness wholly derivative. His arguments are not empirical in the neuroscientific sense. They are transcendental, conditions for the possibility of experience. Against Cartesian dualism. He does not posit two substances, mind and matter, interacting. Rather, he dissolves the purported gap. Subject and object are only one. Close to Advaita Vedanta and neutral monism, he favors a non-dual ontology in which the ultimate one underlies the apparent many. Scholars describe his view as blending Advaita with a modern post-Kantian phenomenology, methodologically empirical about experience. His appeal to the empirical fact that consciousness is never experienced in the plural is a phenomenological datum, not a lab result. This cluster, phenomenology plus Vedanta-inflected monism, explains why Schrödinger often reads like a philosopher of awareness first, science second. The ordering is deliberate. Scientific pictures arise within awareness. They cannot explain awareness away. 15. Why this still matters. Current debates about consciousness, integrated information, global workspace, higher-order thought, predictive processing, operate inside the objectivating stance that Schrödinger analyzed. They model the functional organization that correlates with consciousness. Schrödinger would likely welcome those models, while insisting that no description of correlations can convert the subject of experience into an object among objects. That's not an anti-scientific veto. It's a reminder of the limits and extraordinary power of the scientific stance. In that sense, Schrödinger's Vedanta is less an import than a translation of his phenomenology. Atman equals Brahman is a minimal name for the fact that the I, that experiences, and the world that is experienced are not two alien orders, but two aspects of one. He does not ask physics to validate this. He asks us not to make category errors when we try to describe it. Appendix. Timeline with philosophical cross-references. 1887. Born in Vienna. Early exposure to the humanities and sciences. Later credits his teachers. Exner, Hasenerl. 1910. Doctorate, University of Vienna. War service follows. 1921 to 1927. Zurich. Develops wave mechanics. 1926. Preference for continuous, deterministic mathematics foreshadows his anti-dualism in philosophy. 1933. Nobel Prize with Dirac. Leaves Berlin in protest at Nazi policies. 1935. Present situation in quantum mechanics, entanglement, and the cat, illustrates the measurement problem without appealing to mind collapse. 1944. What is life? Epilogue begins explicit argument that mind is singular. Cites Upanishads. Praises Huxley's perennial philosophy. 1958. Mind and matter. The world is given to me only once. Subject and object are only one. The world picture argument against locating the ego inside the picture. 1961. Dies in Vienna after returning as professor emeritus. My view of the world consolidates his philosophical outlook, which Britannica explicitly links to Vedanta. Consciousness is a singular of which the plural is unknown.